In this video, we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about understanding relative and absolute cell references, which is located on starting on page Excel 34. And as you work in Excel, you may want to reuse formulas in different parts of a worksheet to reduce the amount of data you have to retype. For an example, you may want to include a what-if analysis in one part of a worksheet showing a set of sales projections if increased by 10%, and another analysis in another part of a worksheet showing projections if sales increase by 50%. You can copy the formulas from one section to another and just change the 1 to a 5, but when you copy formulas, it's important to make sure that they refer to the correct cells. To do this, you need to understand the difference between relative and absolute cell references. So first of all, you use a relative cell reference when you want to preserve the relationship to the formula location. And when you create a formula that references other cells, Excel normally does not record the exact cell address. Instead, it looks at the relationship that the cell has to the cell containing the formula. For an example, if you would have some information that's in cell F5 that contains a formula equals sum B5 to E5, when Excel retrieves the values to calculate the formula in cell F5, it actually looks for the cell 4 columns to the left of the formula, which in this case is cell B5. This way, if you copy the cell to a new location, such as F6, the results will reflect the new formula location, and it will automatically retrieve the values in cells B6, or B6, C6, D6, and E6. And these are all relative cell references because Excel is recording the input cells in relation to or relative to the cell formula. In most cases, you want to use relative cell references when copying or moving. This is so that this is the Excel default that's on there. Now, of course, like I said, it's based upon the cell relationship on there, and when that formula is copied, it changes the relationship up there to match up where the cell has been copied to. And like I said, this is the Excel default. And of course, here's the example that we're looking at. So if we have sum B5 to E5, it's not necessarily looking at specifically these cells. It's looking at 4 cells to the left, 3 cells to the left, 2 cells to the left, and 1 cell to the left. So if I would copy this over to G5, instead of adding up quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, it would add up quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and the total. So it uses it relative to where it's at on there. Now, if I would copy it straight down, it would then say, well, it's still 4 cells to the left. And that's why it automatically updates when we've done that earlier. Now, however, you want to use an absolute cell reference when you want to preserve the exact cell address in a formula. And there are times when you want Excel to retrieve the formula information from a specific cell, and you don't want that cell address in the formula to change when you copy it to a new location. For example, you might have a price in a specific cell that you want to use in all of your formulas, regardless of their location. If you used a relative cell reference, the formula results would be incorrect because Excel would use a different cell every time you copied the formula, because it would be looking so many cells up, to the left, to the right, or so many cells below the formula where you're currently at. Therefore, that's when you need to use an absolute cell reference on there. And that absolute cell reference is a reference that does not change even if the formula is copied to another location. Now, you can create an absolute cell reference by placing a $ in front of both the column letter and the row number of the cell address. And you can either type the $ when typing the cell address. So if we were going to do one on there, if we were going to make sure that B16 did not change, we would have to put $B and $16. And that means that whenever we copy that B16 is always going to stay the same. So you can either type in the $, or you can use your F4 key on your keyboard. And when you press that, when you're inside of a cell reference, such as B16, When you press the F4, the dollar signs are going to be added automatically on there. And of course, when you have the dollar sign in front of the column name and then by the row number on there, that means that that is an absolute cell reference that's on there. Now you can have a mixed cell reference on there. Of course, this will show you some examples of when we're going to have an absolute cell reference. So we see that right here in B16 we have a number here, and we want that always to stay put all the time. So if we copy this from where it says equals C5 times $B $16, if we would copy that down, it will change the first one because the first one is a relative cell reference. However, notice the B16 has not copied on there, and that's because it's an absolute cell reference. Now, sometimes you may want to use what we call a mixed reference. And of course, this is where you want either the row to change, but the column to stay the same, or you want the column to change and the rows stay the same. And that's what we call a mixed reference on there. And that is created also using the F4 key that's on your keyboard. And if you want one to change, if you want one to change but not the other, you would put the dollar sign in front of the part that you don't want to change. So if you didn't want the column to change, like for an example C14, you would put $C and then the number 14, which means that it's always going to stay in row C, but then or in column C, but then the row numbers would change. Or if you wanted the columns to change but not the row number, you would just put the $14. So there's lots of different combinations. There are four main different combinations that you can have. You can have an absolute cell reference, which is the dollar sign in front of both the column and the row name. Or you can have a dollar sign in front of either the column or the row, and that would be a mixed cell reference. Or you can have a relative cell reference where it's just the name of the cell there as well. So that is some information about understanding relative and absolute cell references. In our next video, we're actually going to go ahead and talk about copying formulas with relative cell references.